Hello, my name is Manuel, and today I'm going to be discussing genealogy in this video. I have with me today my father, Manuel, and we're just going to be discussing a little bit about genealogy and public history and how it all ties together. So genealogy is a subfield, I guess you could say, of public history being a field in itself of just regular history, and there's various levels of it, one being local and oral history. Now, local history, as we've learned in this course, is basically studying the history of an area or a person or a place. So that could mean studying a family, a town, a city, a state, whatever you want to call it. And therefore, family history is a very important aspect of that. Then also, if you look at oral histories are stories and lessons passed down through the generations to the generations coming up. And it's a way for the generations to understand who they are, where they came from, and basically help them create an identity for themselves. So today I'm with my father, Manuel, and today I'm going to ask him a couple questions and see what he has to say on the topic. So my dad is the family genealogy person. He's really interested in it. So I'm going to first ask you, could you briefly discuss what you have discovered from your research on our family history? What are we, where we come from, and stuff like that?
Basically, we come from, our ancestry come from Turkey, and basically, really, our family kind of traveled all over, and we stayed in one area and maybe had some family there, and then maybe moved on and went to another country or whatever it may be, and we stopped there, and then we had, our ancestry had more family in another region, and pretty much that right there.
Okay. What tools do you use when you're researching? What kind of technology? And
I use the computer. I actually use Ancestry.com. I do the National Archives. And I also have done the Y-DNA test, which is where they wipe out your slobber out of your mouth, and they match it up with other people. And that's kind of where it is matched up with people in other countries, and that proves then that we have some connection to that region.
Okay. How accurate would you say is the results that come from DNA testing?
I would probably say, because sometimes I question about that, maybe 75%.
Okay. So when you're doing this research and all this, looking into DNA connections and family history, how do you determine if a connection is valid or if it's just, there's no way to determine it?
Well, to be honest with you, I guess I would have to listen to the oral history part, and then the written part of what we have written down for our family. And then with the Y-DNA, if there's something comes up that I'm just totally blown away, I might ignore that part, and then maybe just basically just kind of go in where it proves that this is true, and this might be questionable, things like that.
Okay. What role, you mentioned oral history, what role do you think oral history and how it can be used as a tool?
Oral history is that's a good question, because my grandfather had told us stories about, or he would tell me a story about maybe somebody in his family, which is part of my family, and it goes down, and eventually sometimes it is written down to confirm it, you know, but then sometimes it's maybe something that someone made up or something, but it can't really prove it. But to be honest with you, I think it could go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, and when you were a kid, you've mentioned that we have heritage from Spain and Portugal.
True.
And we went recently on a trip there, and you were able to actually find some similarities, not necessarily valid historical ties there, but you found various similarities. Could you discuss some of those?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, here's a good example, and I know this for a fact because one time I went to my grandfather's house, and I went to visit him, and he was cooking something, and I didn't think much about it, but when I asked him what he had, he said that he had stuck hamburger meat into some cucumbers. Well, believe it or not, Portuguese people did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really thought about that until later when I started getting into the genealogy, and then I found out that there was actually a connection right there. And here's another good example. When my son and I went to Portugal, there were so many people that come up to me and said, "Oh, you got that Portuguese name," or "Oh my goodness, you look like a relative of mine." So there's got to be some truth to it, but you know, I could see that part. But then some parts where, like for example, they say that we're related to King Manuel, but we can't really find a connection there.
That brings up my next question. What problems can a person discover when they're relying maybe too much on oral history?
It could go on forever and ever and really not be positive. Pretty much, you know, if you keep searching and searching, and after a while you're going to mess up, or by an accident you're going to insert something that is not true.
So what types of methods can a person do to avoid getting stuck in this endless loop of finding something they may never find?
The thing what they got to do is that they got to go into the courthouse. They have actually got to have written records to look at. Mm-hmm. You know, one person can say this, but it's possible, but we can't prove it. Mm-hmm. But unless we have it actually written down on a paper of some kind of document, that's the only way that it can be proven.
So basically, the idea is that to do proper research in genealogy, oral history, local history, you're going to have to go into these places and find the documents. Now, sometimes you can use the oral stories from your family as a starting point, as a way to say, my grandfather told me that I was related to a Portuguese royalty. So you could maybe take that information and go to a historical society in Portugal and have them there help you find your heritage. The problem is obviously that some of those documents are destroyed, or
they didn't exist,
they didn't write it down, and that's one problem with oral history. In our research in this course, we've discovered that basically the early days much depended on orally transmitted information. People would tell each other, you were related to this person, you were related to that person, and then it ended up being transferred down through the line and never written down with evidence. Now in the more recent generations, in the 18th and 19th century, people would write it down in books or blogs and stuff like that, and that's a valuable resource for anyone researching history. But for the most part, the goal for a proper research in public history is to focus on trying to find the evidence, because sometimes the evidence is going to lead you to another area that you hadn't thought of, and then eventually things may come together. But for the most part, you're just going to have to use the sources available to you. So thank you for watching this video, and I hope it helps you.